Good afternoon, everyone. Come now, come now, come now, come now, come now. Good afternoon, everyone. All right. My name is David Kim, and I have the great privilege and honor to be on the faculty here at Connecticut College. And before I start, I want to say my words of gratitude and thanks to the students who have organized this. Brother Oliver and Benedict and Ben and Millie and Sarah and all the folks over here, right, with the X shirts on. Right? Please, stand up. Come on, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up. I'm here to talk today about a difficult and strange topic, radical love. Right? And, you know, it's a difficult and strange topic, actually evinced even by the laughs in response to the topic itself, right? I mean, I started by saying a thanks and gratitude. Because I think one of the things that's operating in our culture right now, one of the things that's operating in our deeply cynical times, is this absence of the capacity to say thanks, right? This openness that we are required, that is required of us to experience real gratitude. I mean, what is cynicism, after all? It's this condition of distancing, right, where we cannot be with another. We cannot feel ourselves with another, and also a distancing from ourselves. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about radical love with you today is to try to find a strategy, try to think collectively with you, to implore us, to collapse that distancing that we find in our deeply cynical times and deeply cynical culture. I mean, we are living in this incredibly dark moment, not just here in the United States, but around the world. You know, as Ramzi had talked about his childhood in Lebanon, or Ali was talking about being vulnerable here on the campus. Think about the warfare that has been raging for decades now around the world. Think about the unfathomable instances of racial hatred they were confronted with daily, assaulted with daily. My heart is heavy. My heart is heavy, and I don't want to give into this feeling, this moment that we are living in a loveless world. But these feel like loveless and dark times. Think about the young men who've died this year in the United States. We know the well-known names: Michael Brown in Ferguson, Eric Garner, Staten Island, and just recently, Walter Scott in South Carolina. My heart is heavy because I think about these, not just these young men, but their families. And not just at the young men. I mean, think about someone like Michael Brown. He was 18 years old. I have an 18-year-old at home and a 15-year-old at home. They're my sons, and I don't call them young men. I call them boys. So what are we doing now in this dark time, where every day we're confronted with the news, not just of racism, but of violence that accompanies that racism? You know, there was a survey done amongst the LA police recently, and they were asked about their perceptions of black folks. And overwhelmingly in this survey, the answer was this perception, particularly of black males, that they tended to assume that they were violent and aggressive, that they saw young black boys as much older than they actually were. And I think about this, and I think in this racist culture, in these racist times, who are they seeing? And who are they not seeing? You know, when the officer shot Walter Scott in Charleston, South Carolina, I kept wondering to myself, did he actually see another human being when he shot him? Did he actually feel the humanity of another human being? I mean, the logic of racism is to assume that another population is less than human. And that if you are the subject of racism, let's call it the object of racism, you feel less than human. The culture tells you that you are less than human. What are we to do? What are we to do? Many of you know, here at Connecticut College, we have been embroiled and raging around questions about race, questions about the racialization of peoples. And here it's not just black and brown bodies, but Muslim bodies, Arab bodies, Palestinian bodies. It feels hopeless at times. So where is the love in this context? How are we to feel love in this context? And why bother to talk about love at all? In the face of this kind of hatred, in the face of this kind of persistent dehumanization, it's right to ask, what are we to do? What are we to do? And who do we turn to? I have said to our students here, you've heard me say this a number of times, we at the college have been knocked down and kicked back on the ground. And it was the students, it was the young people, not just the young people, but it were the actual object, the subjects of that racism and hatred, who insisted to pick us up, right? And here, what do I want to do? I want to localize the work of the agency of these activists as acts of love. If I am a person of color, by the way, which I am, right? And I feel racism, love is hard to conjure. Right? It's hard to conjure. Again, like if I think about that policeman who shot Walter Scott, I'm thinking, who did he see? Did he actually see another human being? Think about the energy, think about the courage, think about the insistence on freedom of these young folks at the college and elsewhere. Think about the young activists in Ferguson who said, enough. That's not just, quote unquote, mere politics. That's not just an attempt to seize power. That was an insistence by these young folks, and a continuing insistence by these young folks of their humanity. You call us, they say to the white supremacist, you call us less than human. You insist that we are less than human, and yet, in response, they say, we are fully human. Come to recognize our humanity. That's not just a question about human rights. Again, this to me is an act of love. And it starts where? It starts with an act of self-love. To be told over and over and over again from one's birth to death that you are less than human, that you are less than. Or as W.E.B. Du Bois famously asked in The Souls of Black Folk, what does it feel like to be a problem? If your psyche is shaped and forged as a problem, think about the tremendous energies and courage it takes to say, I am not a problem, but I am a virtue. I am not a problem, but I am a solution. I am not a problem, but I am the vanguard for the freedom that we do not have. To insist on their humanity, these young activists are bearing love first for themselves because they have been born into a loveless world. And this requires to try to breach a gap to those cynical, racist folks who have been insisting on the inhumanity, the less than humanity of these folks of color, that the gap can be closed. How do you close that gap? if I'm confronted with a racist, as I am almost every day of my life, how do I close that gap? How do I find a way to reach across when my hand is batted away every day, each time, every time? Now, the grand answer is somehow to find some forgiveness, find some kind of pathology, right, in that other person and say, well, you know, they had their trauma. They're broken, but we're all broken vessels. We're all broken people. You have to carry a burden when you are the subject of racism, when you are the subject of that dehumanization. You carry a burden to lift yourself up and then to try to lift up the rest of the world. What do I do in the face of someone who says to me, do not extend your hand to me? How do I forgive them that? Sometimes I think to myself, you have to start with small gestures. You have to start with small gestures. You know, I was raised in a very confusing way as a Confucian and as a Christian. Confucianism insists as an ethical system that we are bound in a network of reciprocity based on our common humanity. That we have an obligation to each other to flourish, not just ourselves, but to each other. You know, in many ways, you can hear this as a kind of radically un-American perspective. Right? It's not driven by self-interest, but your interest is my interest. But also raised as a Christian, carrying that onerous imperative called the Golden Rule. Love thy neighbor as you would love yourself. In some ways, that's an easier proposition as opposed to the one that says, love thy enemy as you would love yourself. So, if I am faced with a racist, am I faced with someone who has been breathing and drinking the air of white supremacy? How do I love them? Right? Small steps, small steps. I have to begin to help recognize their humanity that they are not recognizing. Right? What is a small step? You know, my kids, my sons, because they're teenagers, like to mock me, right? It is their God-given right? They're put on God's green earth to mock me. And one of their favorite topics of mockery is the fact that I can't get through a door first. You know, that I'm constantly opening a door and waiting. And they hate it when they go to the movies with me, you know, because I'm always sitting in the back in the corner because I've ever let everyone else in first, right? Why do I open doors for other people? Why would I open a door to a racist who has slapped my hand away when I've extended it to him or her? I open a door because I'm trying to model, I'm trying to demonstrate a world that I want. I want to demonstrate a way of being that I want to happen in the world. To open a door for another is to set aside oneself to make way for another, right? Not to insist on my interests, saying, like, I want that seat in the movie theater, right? But it's to suspend my interest long enough to recognize that humanity of that other person. And amazingly, you know, I get this all the time. I open a door, and there's this kind of millisecond of shock often, where a person will say, oh, you're opening a door for me, right? They're experiencing what? They're experiencing a moment of care and kindness. Small acts, right? That evince something deeper that we need. To be loveless, to live in a loveless world, I would argue, is to be unfree. Is to be unfree. We need love to be free. I think of these amazing talks we've heard all day today, right? And this topic, what is this topic? Genius loves company, right? The radical love of the student activists, the radical love of the activists in Ferguson, the radical love of someone who has been heated and extending their humanity to the one who hates them, is an act of genius. It's an act of moral genius. It's an act of affective genius. To conjure something in yourself, to imagine, induce something in the world that is not there. What an amazing thing. When we talk about the suffering of others, we talk about the distant suffering of others in Nigeria, right? In Indonesia. We forget often the humanity that is suffering. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Love thy enemy as thyself. But love yourself first. It's an act of radical love that will set us free and set you free. These are dark times. We need each other. These are dark, cynical times. Don't give in to that cynicism. Find hope. I find hope in our students. I find hope in our young people. I find hope because I have to. I have 2 sons that are going to be set out into the world. And I want them to feel well loved. Thank you very much.